Okay, everyone, happy to see you all on our final day of how to get bodhicitta. Thank you, Tara. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Lars.
Yes, Venerable Robina, welcome tonight. A couple of quick notes. Yes, as you said, this is our BB10. This is week 4 on how to develop bodhicitta. And just a quick reminder that we will not have a teaching next week. And the following module will start on July 7th, BB11, and it'll be transforming problems. And with that said, we'll go ahead and offer the mandala from the center.
So thinking visualizing all the contents of the universe, just use your creative imagination, thinking all the marvelous things of the world and happily offering them to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. That's the plan. That's the way to think.
And just getting the center. Yeah, here we are. Sashi perki yuksing meto jamri raplingi nihide gyan pari sangye shing du mekche owagi rukunam da shing la Jerpakshu Jetsun Lama Dampakienam Kicha Kikala Kense Tertinti Gita Sampe Durje Sen Mala Sabge Churki Chapa Vaptu So Idam Gururatna Mandalakam Yachayami.
So now we, the two parts of this next prayer, taking refuge, reminding ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, for those of us who've committed to being Buddhists. And then secondly, reminding ourselves of our purpose, our goal of being here. That's what motivation means. It sounds a bit different to us. Sort of set your motivation sounds you're kind of going to get all excited and enthusiastic about something. But actually it means what's your purpose? What are you doing? What's your goal? Where are you going? Why are we here together? So we're thinking the most altruistic one, of course, is so suitable for this module, this idea of bodhicitta, that we're going to exist in order to be of benefit to others. Everything we do and think and say will be driven by the thought to only be of benefit to others. That's the plan. That's the idea of bodhicitta. So making that our goal, thinking we're going to listen to these teachings to take the tools from it so we can develop this marvelous potential we've got so we can be of benefit to others. Thinking like that. Sangye charang choke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok sangye charang choke chognam la jangcho badu dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok Sangye charang choke chognam la jangcho baru dagni kyab suchi dagi chernyen gi personam ki drola penchir sangye drupa shok. So what we've talked about so far is this idea, this in the framework of the big picture of the whole path. The first level of the practice that we've discussed is the first scope of teachings, or the teachings that are suitable for the disciple of the least capability, which is how Lama Zopa translates it. And that's all the teachings in the wisdom wing, which is the nuts and bolts of how to abide by the laws of karma, which is this fundamental philosophy that underpins the entire view of the universe as far as Buddha is concerned. And if you're a Buddhist, would be underpinning your approach to practice. Basically, this idea of karma is that we create ourselves. We're not the product of some other person. We bring our own stuff with us. Everything we think and do and say produces the person we become. So the very first level of practice is at least protect ourselves from future suffering by refraining from harming others, because they're the heaviest negative actions. The second level of practice is now we get to the mind. We start to become our own therapists. We start to realize we can start to unpack and unravel and change this mind of ours, get rid of the rubbish. Then we get renunciation. Now we go to the compassion wing, which is where we are now. And the goal here, the next stage of practice, is to achieve this outrageous kind of attitude, this paradigm shift in the mind, where we reverse the usual approach to life, which is normal for the entire universe, which puts I first. Here we're trying to put others first.
The level to which we can accomplish this, I mean, we understand in our culture being generous and loving and compassionate and being unselfish, but the level to which we can accomplish this unselfishness is something astonishing. You know, it feels like it's hard to imagine, but this is the Buddhist approach. This is the Mahayana teachings. So this method, there's two main techniques that, as is discussed in the course notes that you've got, which I hope you've been reading. The first one is known as the 6 causes and 1 result, or the 7 cause, the 7 step or something. And the second one is this more radical one of exchanging self for others. And this 11 techniques, which I sent a little document very briefly summarizing the 11 steps in the cultivating of bodhicitta, is a combination of these two. And that's what we've been discussing. So far, we've discussed the first 4 points. First, equanimity, which is the absolute basis of this development of love and compassion, great compassion, which culminates in bodhicitta. Remember, the bodhicitta, what it is, the definition of it is well, actually, it's this attitude. It's not equivalent of compassion. It's the result of compassion. It's this very specific attitude. Has 2 parts. One would be that you only are thinking of others. Wherever you see any sentient being, it's automatic now that you've got this bodhicitta, that whatever's best for them. That's automatic. It's natural. And then the second part of bodhicitta is this long-term goal, that life after life after life, you're driven by this intense compassion that wish only to be a benefit to others. So you'll never give up becoming this Buddha, no matter how many lifetimes it takes you. That's what drives you from life to life. So these 11 techniques, we've started with bodhicitta, and bodhicitta is the fundamental one. I mean, sorry, equanimity. There's different ways of saying that word in Buddhism, but here the equanimity we're discussing is a very precise, heartfelt attitude in your own mind, this heartfelt recognition that all the sentient beings of the universe, whom we can divide into friends, enemies, and strangers, the objects of the 3 poisons, the objects of attachment of friends, they're the ones who do what your attachment wants. Then the objects of aversion, the enemies, the ones who actively don't do what you want. And the third category, the object of indifference, who are the strangers, who neither harm nor help you. That's the way the universe sees each other, through the lenses of the 3 poisons. And so so equanimity is this radical idea that you get yourself out of that equation. Instead of seeing everybody in reference to yourself, which is what a friend, enemy, and stranger are, you see them from their own point of view. Sounds very simple, but it's quite powerful. This equanimity is a starting point. So at the moment, we do have love, which is may you be happy. And we do have compassion, which is may you not suffer, but only for that first group, pretty much automatically. In other words, if you do what my attachment wants, I'm prepared to love you and have compassion for you. And it sounds brutal, but that's how it is. So we're trying to change that. So the logic of ego, which of course is not logic at all, is I will love you if you do what my attachment wants. It's implicit. We don't say it so brutally, but it's implicit. But here we're trying to shift that. We want everybody to be happy, not just those who make us happy. So what's the logic for that? And that's what equanimity is, this recognition that everybody wants to be happy and everybody doesn't want to suffer. That's the point about equanimity. It's the recognition that that's what drives every living being, whether they're psychopaths or whether they're saints. Everybody's driven by the wish to be happy and not suffer. And that's the logic of equanimity. So we step out of the equation and then we start to recognize that every single person, whether they're good to us or bad to us, all want to be happy and don't want to suffer. And it's upon that we then grow, build up this edifice that eventually culminates in bodhicitta. So far we've discussed these little techniques coming from the centuries of this little kind of bunch of, this methodology, this series of techniques. The first one is equanimity. Upon this, we then go to the next point, which is really just get the calculator out, that every sentient being has been my mother, and why mother is a good example of a person who's nurtured you. So we've got to, as I've been discussing, we've got to do a bit of extra thinking there, because we tend to think mothers are terrible. They're the cause of all our suffering. Well, the logic here is a mother is one who gave birth to you and has taken care of you all your life. So as I said last week, that's an extra piece of thinking for us to do. The only reason to use the example of mother is someone who's taken care. And as His Holiness says to us Western people who don't like our mums, well, think of someone else. Just an example. The third one is the mother is kind. And we looked into this one. There's 2 parts to this, 3A and 3B, excuse me. And that's a really interesting technique we really looked at carefully. The way we use the word kind, I think, is very self-centered. I will say that you're kind if you do what I want. You can be a really kind person, even in your nature, but you might not do what I want. So I don't think you're kind. So really our use of the word kind is quite self-centered. If you do what I want, you're kind. You know, I don't care whether you're mean to other people or not. I don't care. So it's not a very valid one. Kind here is a broader concept. It's the fact that, let's say your mother, the first one, 3A. And like I said, even if your mum's been really mean to you, there's still this exercise that we can do, which is a really brilliant exercise, is to think about the things that she has done that have helped you. Well, she gave birth to you. Let's assume your mother gave birth to you. Somebody gave birth to you. You came out of somebody's womb. Well, that's pretty kind. My God in heaven, if I think of that alone, that is an astonishingly kind thing to do. And then that person, let's say they gave birth, let's say they gave you away. We talked about this. Even if they gave you away, we will definitely think that mother is not kind. You're absolutely wrong. I'm sorry. Your mother didn't abort you. If you look at the world, and it's not being rude about people who abort, well, lots of us abort people. I aborted a child when I was young. You know, many mothers abort their babies. I'm not criticizing anybody. It's a fact. The fact that your mother didn't abort you is enough reason to never stop being grateful to her. She gave you a life. This is not a joke. This is scientific fact. So we don't think of this, you know. Your mother, I mean, maybe if she was a neurotic mother, maybe she was an alcoholic mother, maybe she's a totally self-centered mother, but she still fed you. Hang on a minute, just a second. I've got to answer my front door. I'm so sorry. Wait, please. Who's the postman? The mailman, as they say in America. The postman, as we say in Australia. Okay. Okay, so the mother, this person, so what we're trying to do really in this exercise is paint a new picture of somebody. Instead of always seeing everybody in reference to them, to whether they make you happy, whether they do nice things to you, you see it from the point of view that your mother might have been a neurotic person. In fact, all the more reason to think she's kind. I mean, you know yourself when you're feeling very depressed and anxious and you do something for someone else, it's much more effort, isn't it? Well, much more to be appreciated. So there's these exercises we discussed. Then the second one, 3B, is a seemingly quite shocking concept and much more logical in a way, and it's based on interdependence, that every being in the universe is kind insofar as since you were conceived, everything that has benefited your life up to now, everything that has facilitated your life up to now, is the handiwork of sentient beings. This is a fact. You start to look at this as a scientific fact. That's pretty stupendous, you know, pretty powerful. So the fourth one, like we said last week, it's like a conclusion that would come, of course, if you meditate more and more sincerely on these points, it would come naturally. I must repay their kindness, you know. So that's taken from the sixth one, cause and effect business, that one. Now we move into the components that have come from the other techniques, which are the exchanging self for others, which is said to be the more dramatic, more radical approach. In fact, next module, transforming problems, is really part of how you get bodhicitta. But because it's such a powerful practice that Lama Zopa really stresses, and it really is the key practice for really smashing our delusions in order to get bodhicitta, transforming problems is huge practice. It's actually part of how you get bodhicitta. So I'm going to mention it briefly. It'll come briefly here in these steps we're going to go through the finishing today. So we'll use our little 11 techniques here. First one, equanimity. Second, all sentient beings have been my mother. Third, contemplating the kindness of the mother. And the 3B, contemplating the kindness of all beings. 4, repaying their kindness. Now we go through these gradual incremental stages in our mind to gradually move from self-centeredness being the natural main instinct in us, and don't feel depressed about that, it's just natural, to gradually turning it around and it becoming eventually putting others first. So one goes through these gradual steps, you know, and each of these steps is quite precise, quite precise. So now the next step is seeing others and myself as equal. So this is exactly the same, really, as the first one, seeing enemies, friends, and strangers as equal. It's the same as that, except now the reference point is oneself in relation to others. So let's look at this idea of putting self first. Let's look at the idea of this, self-cherish. The Tibetans call it self-cherishing. We would call it being selfish. And I mean, so I think we really need to understand exactly the point, because this is what's implied. This is the main enemy. As far as this approach in the bodhisattva path, that is the essential enemy. That is the one we're trying to shift. So let's look at this a little bit. Let's look at this in reference to attachment. So in the wisdom wing, all the work you need to do on yourself, what's implied in all of that work, especially in the second scope, where you look into your mind and we look at the three poisons, the root delusion, ignorance, the misconception of a self, which gives rise to its main voice, which is attachment to get what that self wants. That's what drives us. And that's what we have to learn to understand. And in Buddhist psychology, that's what we learn about. So in the second scope, we learn very much about the way the mind works according to the Buddha's analysis. And we're looking at the delusions, the neuroses, the afflictions, the misconceptions, the emotional afflictions, the neurotic emotions. The key one, as we've been discussing endlessly, is attachment. This frantic emotional hunger to get what I want. So, of course, it sounds brutal saying it this way. We kind of get defensive. Well, you know, I think of others. I do think of others. Yes, of course we do. But this idea that we can get rid of this attachment is pretty radical, because it just seems like so natural for us because we're all like it. So that's the main emphasis in the wisdom wing, to get rid of attachment, this emotional hunger to get what I want. And then that gives rise to anger or aversion or panic or anxiety or depression when it doesn't get what it wants. And then these three are the basis of all the other delusions. It's a very clear model. Now, the emphasis in the compassion wing is different. The main enemy here, and it's implied all the way through, it's not referred to as attachment. I mean, attachment is the problem, but you could argue because of that attachment, we then put self first. This is hard to hear because it seems so brutal. It seems so unkind. It seems so extreme to actually say that putting self first is the main enemy. It's really hard to hear this. When you can be accused of having attachment, you almost laugh about it. Oh yeah, I'm so attached to chocolate cake. Oh, I'm so attached to boys, we'll joke. But if you're accused of being selfish, we get very hurt, very defensive, very upset. So this is really quite brutal to hear that it's the main problem, that's putting yourself first. In the whole reference point in the development of bodhicitta is to stop putting self first and to put others first. So when you've accomplished this bodhicitta, you could say the criterion of the success of having accomplished bodhicitta is that you've made this paradigm shift in your mind. And now there is only the thought of others. They say one of the criteria, the first criterion of having accomplished bodhicitta is there's no longer the thought of I. Now, this in ordinary modern psychology sounds really quite depressing. It sounds, in fact, insane. It sounds like a mental illness. So we've got to hear it properly. And we've got to know that it's extremely advanced, just like you're being a saint. And we talk about saints. If you're brought up in a Christian culture, especially Catholics, you hear about the saints. But there's sort of these unique, unbelievable people who get born with this extraordinary qualities somehow, but you don't think I can become like that. You just pray to them, But this is exactly what a bodhisattva is. It's just a Sanskrit word referring to a person who truly is what you would call a saint. But it's sort of almost like used sarcastically in the West. Oh, God, she's such a saint. Because it's too hard to imagine, and it does not fit with ordinary psychology. It doesn't fit with the neuroscientific models of the mind. The neuroscientific models of the mind are related to the materialist model of the mind, which is the view of that there are delusions. Naturally, we have attachment. Naturally, there is ego grasping. Naturally, there is fear when I gets upset. Naturally, there is anger. Naturally, there is anxiety. Naturally, there is depression. That's the way we talk in our modern views of the mind. So this is a very different kettle of fish. You've got to really realize it's quite out of the ordinary. It's quite different, radically, radically different. And it's sort of like it's exhausting to hear it. You mean I've got to love everybody? You mean I've got to have compassion for everybody? You mean that's possible? You know, it's hard to kind of hear it because it attacks this natural feeling of defensiveness. Well, if I don't take care of me, who will? And all that's built into our modern psychology. So we've got to try and hear this properly. It's very hard, you know. It seems kind of shocking that the idea that putting yourself first is the essential enemy that these 11 techniques conquer. So, and this is why I continually say this. This is why this is an advanced level. The development of compassion, the way Buddha talks about it, is actually advanced practices. If we use that analogy that I do all the time of junior school, high school, university, and postgraduate, well, compassion is university level. Compassion is not enough, as His Holiness says. It's got to have wisdom, and it means you've got to get the wisdom wing down first to some degree, which means you've got to understand attachment and aversion and what causes you your pain and suffering. And because that's what causes you suffering, but it's also what holds you back from having love and compassion for other sentient beings. So it's quite out of the ordinary, this state of mind. It doesn't fit with modern psychology. It doesn't fit with our natural feeling of what's reasonable. You know, it seems extreme. So we've got to hear it appropriately. As Pabonka Rinpoche says, we need to be a suitable vessel to even hear these teachings properly, not to mention practice them. That means you've got to have done the wisdom wing. You've got to have some degree of work on your own mind, abiding by the laws of karma, understanding yourself, knowing your mind well, knowing the suffering of attachment, knowing the suffering of anger, owning responsibility, knowing what your potential is, and having done some work in that. Some awareness and some self-awareness. That's the suitable vessel. Then we can begin to hear this more radical approach. You know, it's quite extreme. In other words, if you're in an ordinary like an ordinary person, join the universe, who's in a relationship with a person, and you're not looking at your mind, and you've got typical attachment and jealousy and anger and resentment and despair and low self-esteem and all the rest, you know, look at the world, typical person who's not looking at their mind, then this is not for you. It's very clear. It's very simple. It's not for you. There's one text that the Tibetans all love. It's called the 8 Verses. They usually have these very poetic titles. This is the most boring title. And we're going to go through this today, if I can finish it quickly, because it's really the 8 verses is the essence. Well, actually, no, the 8 verses is better for transforming problems. We'll go that next time, but I'll mention it briefly here. The 8 verses is this outrageous presentation of 8 little techniques, 8 little approaches that the essence of which, and that is the 8 transforming problems, which is the key method, which we're going to discuss next module, is a way of smashing this self-cherishing, smashing this instinct to put I first. It's extreme, you know, it's extreme. So this very first step to gradually contemplate, actually, that, you know, actually, if we start to now look at every other sentient being in the universe, now start to realize that they are, in fact, exactly the same as me, and just like with equanimity, from one point of view. They want to be happy, just like I do. They do not want to suffer, just like I don't. So we know we only want to be happy. If we analyze the way we live our life, an ordinary person in an ordinary day, you wake up in the morning and it's just totally implicit. You don't state it. I want to be happy. I want to be happy. It's absolutely implicit. It's totally instinctive. And the proof of that is the moment something wrong happens. You stub your toe when you get out of bed. Look what happens. You get upset. What does upset mean? Upset is that you just didn't have a nice feeling. You had an unhappy feeling. So it's really bare bones. Happiness is actually referring to happy feelings. Unhappiness or suffering is actually referring to unhappy feelings. So the moment you stub your toe, it suddenly triggers a very unhappy feeling, doesn't it? So that second, you know you don't want that. You want it to go away. There's the proof that you only want happy feelings. So whenever you get happy feelings, you know, it's kind of like hoping every time you go to the kitchen for your breakfast and you hope the coffee's there and you hope the sugar's there and you hope the tea. And if they all are, you get a happy feeling. So you kind of try to sustain this happy feeling by getting what you want. The second you find the milk has finished, the coffee has finished, the sugar has gone, you get upset, you get annoyed because you just didn't get what you wanted. So you have an unhappy feeling. So we all are driven by this. If all day you don't get what you want, by the end of the day, you'll be very distressed, because you didn't get what you wanted. You didn't get happy feelings. This is what every being in the universe, including the monkeys and the dogs and the ants and the humans, all feel automatically. And that's because if we look back in the wisdom wing, because attachment and aversion are inbuilt, deeply ingrained for countless lifetimes. So it's not that complicated to recognize that everybody is like that. But of course, it takes masses of hard work. And already we've done the first 4 pieces. So we're kind of prepared now. We know enemies and friends and strangers are the same as each other. We know the kindness of other beings, and I want to repay their kindness. So I continue to do this work to unpack and unravel my mind and make this shift in my mind. Now we start this gradual process of slowly making that paradigm shift. So we first use the logic of everybody is exactly the same as me. Now we know this. Our mothers would tell us all the time, you know, we know this, but we've got to do the thinking. We've got to do the meditating. We've got to do the analysis. All these meditations are analytical meditations. You're using logic to argue with ego's instinctive mistakes. It's pretty intense. These meditations aren't just to sit down and get a gooey feeling and cry with compassion. That's too sentimental. You're using logic. Every one of these steps is using logic to argue with ego's instinctive misconceptions that put me first. So this is the reference point for all of these points in this entire bodhicitta path, is to learn to gradually move away this paradigm shift from putting me first to putting others first. And eventually, of course, not just occasionally, but that is when you have got bodhicitta. So this is the very first little step, tentative little step in making this gradual shift, turning our mind around to get to see the logic. Whether the pedophile or the saint, they're both driven by the same wish, you know, to be happy and not suffer. So, of course, because you understand karma back in junior school, you know what it is that drives the pedophile. You know what it is that drives the terrorist. You understand their delusions. So their assumption that jumping on little girls is the way to get happy, or terrorizing people and dropping bombs is the way to get happy. That's due to their past karma. You already understand that from being in junior school. So this is something really fundamental, you know, really primordial. Everybody is driven by the same things. Everybody only wants to be happy, only wants to have happy feelings, only doesn't want to have unhappy feelings. This is really, because we have to see this with enormous confidence, you know. And then slowly, of course, what comes from this isn't just the logic. What comes from this then is this gradual, as we're getting there, realizing we're all in the same boat. So the next one now is again using logic to move us away from this I-based to be other-based. The next step, number 6, we're just going through these very briefly, you know. The next one, number 6, now to do the contemplation, to contemplate the disadvantages of cherishing yourself more than others. So this is, it seems almost a bit selfish. You mean I've got to see the disadvantages to me? Yes, indeed, you do. Don't underestimate that. Like in the middle scope, when we start to look at the mind, we start to see how attachment causes us suffering. The only reason you want to give up anything is because it causes you suffering. And if you don't see how it causes you suffering, you won't want to give it up. So here it's the same as that, but the emphasis is on the putting of I first. So if you don't like to think about yourself, the disadvantages to you of being self-centered, think about other people you know. It's pretty evident. Think about people you know who you'd say are really, oh God, she's so selfish, you'd say. She thinks of herself all the time. And you know what that person's like. They're not a happy person. They're miserable, always complaining, thinking nobody loves them, nobody helps me, who's going to love me, everything's always wrong, he's wrong, they're wrong, the government's wrong, they're wrong, I go to the doctor, they're wrong, everybody's wrong, and you're always thinking you're poor me, it's poor me. You know that kind of person, you know that kind of person. Well, look at it. Look at how that person who is being self-centered is totally, utterly miserable, and nobody can stand being anywhere near them. We totally know this. Well, now look at yourself, refer that to yourself. Somehow it's very intense. Seeing the suffering of attachment seems almost kinder to ourselves, we can realize, look, when you're an alcoholic or you eat too much, we can have compassion for ourselves, but it feels hard to see how you're being selfish causes you suffering, because we don't like to admit to being selfish. It sounds kind of cruel, so we really got to be all this kind of inner work is intense. It's really intense. It demands incredible kind of authenticity, incredible self-respect, actually, not just hate yourself and beat yourself up, which we love to do. This demands some kind of real self-respect and self-confidence, that you're able to see the parts of you that cause you pain, which are the miserable ones, but we get defensive. We feel like we're being attacked. And the first instinct when we hear this kind of teachings is, well, excuse me, that's insane. I mean, this sounds like, honestly, it sounds a bit like mental illness, to think that you've got to put others first. It's too hard for us, because the natural view, which is ego, is that I have to come first, and it's so instinctive with us. It's so primordial. That's why when we always admire, like always, you think of those big disasters, I remember the towers falling down in New York. And there are all the people running down the stairs. Then there are some people running up the stairs to help others. You almost can't believe those people. It seems too intense, In the face of incredible suffering like that, you're thinking of others. It's pretty unusual. But we often can hear marvelous stories like that. And we always admire those stories. We admire those people. And you can certainly see it with parents, I mean, I remember years ago watching a video or film on the television or something about the dramatic extreme things that mothers would do for their children. Like one mother would like intense, because of the intensity of the wish to save her baby, she even lifted up a car. Another mother ran into a burning house. Of course, they're also driven by attachment, but that would be the way we're talking about, how we're trying to cultivate this idea of putting others first. So of course it takes enormous training. Don't wait for the house to burn down before you think of the other people in there. You've got to start with the small things, And I think this is where we really can learn to be more kind to ourselves, because we can see how exhausting it is being kind to other people, especially if they're not your beloveds, how tiring it is, how much patience we need, how much effort we need to make. And it's exhausting to think of. This is why these practices are like exhausting, because it does demand effort. And why it demands effort is because you're not attached to people. The ones you're attached to, it's easy to love them. It's easy to sacrifice your life for them. But the ones we don't love, the enemies and all the strangers, it's exhausting to think that you have to have this amount of, thinking, to observing the obstacles in yourself to why you don't feel this for everybody, There's all these techniques. So to see the disadvantages. Now, this is very clear, but you've got to be very honest with yourself, because we don't think I'm suffering because I'm self-centered. We think we're suffering because other people are mean, isn't it? It's always somebody else, isn't it? But the logic is, if you didn't have self-cherishing, you wouldn't suffer. Pretty clear. And that's the point from Buddha's point from day one, karma, the mind, all the way up to here. And by now, having done the wisdom wing to some degree, we're kind of familiar with that approach, that we're learning to look into our own mind to identify the problems, not the world. This is his Buddha's key expertise, this deep analysis of the way our mind works. So the next one, now we keep this as a different way of seeing this previous point, number 6. Number 7 is now look at the advantages to yourself of cherishing others. And again, look at the world. You can think of people or you read about, or who are incredibly kind, taking care of other people, spending their lives taking care of other people. And somehow, the ones who don't have much, because they're not self-cherishing, they are happy. They're happy people. And people, this is the advantages. People adore people like that. People love being around kind people. You know yourself, there are some people who are very kind, who don't criticize you, who accept you for who you are. You adore people like that. You feel safe among people like that because they're not always pointing fingers at you. They kind of embrace you. We know people like that are marvelous. We love being around people like that. So the point is, look at the advantages to that person of not cherishing themselves. So you've got to start with this, and then eventually, as you cultivate this, it becomes natural. You don't do it because people are going to like you. It's not a question of that. But it's just to observe very logically that why we suffer. It's a different take on the wisdom wing. It's another approach, but it's the same kind of idea. The Buddha's pointing out to us the reason we suffer is because of the delusions in our own mind. And the particular emphasis here is the one of putting I first. It's a pretty intense one, I tell you. But this is what it is. And number 8, now we now gradually moving next step. And here it's now we decide, these are the methods for now wanting to cultivate compassion and wanting to cultivate love. So there's 8 and 9 points are the essence of this practice called Tonglen. So let's discuss this, 8 and 9. So now it's the wish to develop this compassion for others, and it's the wish to have love for others. So compassion, again, what is that? It begins with a thought, may you not suffer. If you see a person suffering and this thought, may you not suffer, it's what we mean by empathy. Often in modern psychology, they have these different definitions of compassion and empathy, but here they're effectively synonymous. That you see a person suffering, you hear about suffering, and your instinct is to wish it didn't happen. May it not happen. And love is, may you be happy. You see happiness, you see people happy, you want them to be happy. Love and compassion. That's the essence of all the virtues, So this is we practice these in the framework of this technique called Tonglen. It means giving, taking. Tonglen, giving, taking. And it's this actually, I think this technique derives from this text called the 8 verses, which we're going to go into next module, by this Tibetan yogi called Lungri Tangpa. And it's the 7th of the 8 verses. And I think this technique of Tonglen comes from there, where he says you're going to secretly take upon yourself the suffering of others and happily give everybody all your good qualities and your merit. So this is the essential technique that does the final job of smashing self-cherishing. And it's very fascinating. It's a really advanced practice, but I find lots of people in the West love it. And I'm very curious. I don't know why. It's because it's so intense, but people love it. So essentially what it is, you can do it as a formal meditation. There's lots of ways you can do it, very extensively, very simply. But this is the heart technique. This is what does the shift. So Tonglen, very simply speaking, you visualize in front of you a person. And as you know, Pabonka Rinpoche in Liberation in the Palm of Your Hand actually says, in the morning you do the meditation, well, you put in front of yourself in the afternoon with a headache. He doesn't say the headache. Even you begin with self in the afternoon having a problem. You visualize the morning you do the meditation, you visualize yourself, let's say, with a headache. Then the next step is you can go to a friend with a headache. Then you can go even further with an enemy with a headache, and then a stranger. People spend years in retreat doing this Tonglen, doing this practice, taking upon themselves the suffering of every single sentient being in the universe, all the realms of existence, and then giving their happiness and their joy and their good qualities to every sentient being. It's an outrageous practice. That's why I'm so surprised people like it. So what you do simply, just an example, simple. The essence of it is this. Hang on a sec. The essence of it is this. So you visualize your beloved in front of you. It could be your precious child who's sick. A person who is easy for you to have compassion for. You start with this. So there's a person in front of you, you visualize, and they're suffering. Let's say they've got a headache, or let's say they're sick or something, whatever it is, doesn't matter. So what you do with the meditation, you're using your breath. So one technique, very simple, you'd imagine yourself cherishing like a little rock at your heart, you know, whatever you like, be very creative. So what you do is you've got to breathe in first, obviously, don't you? Yeah, you breathe in. So the first one is you actually do the taking. The Tong is giving, I think. It says giving and taking, but you do the taking first. So the essence of it is this. You see this person in front of you, whom you adore, like your friend, and they've got suffering, like a headache. And then until you breathe in. The first step is you use your breath and you breathe in, and you're imagining you're breathing into yourself. You're taking away from them. You're breathing off them their headache. So the attitude is, I don't want them to suffer. Let me take it. So basically, compassion is, oh my God, look at that person with a headache. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. The next one, and this leads to it. This technique leads to this next one, the 10th point, which is called great compassion. So great compassion, I think I've talked about this. Let's go away from Tonglen for a second. So great compassion is actually the unique characteristic of the compassion of the Bodhisattva path. It's the unique characteristic. I think I might have said this before, and somebody asked me the question, so I'll say it again. And this is the radical difference of the compassion of the Bodhisattva compared with the compassion of what that you would accomplish when you've, let's say, when you're on the wisdom wing and you accomplish your own cessation of suffering and its causes. You achieve your own nirvana. So let's look at this. Okay, you're on the Theravadan path, let's say. If you're studying in Burma and Thailand, then you're studying the same practices and practicing the same practices that are shared on the path of the Lam Rim, the first and second scopes. You'd abide by the laws of karma, you'd live in vows, you'd purify your mind, you'd go to the second scope, you'd then learn to understand the delusions, you'd recognize attachment, you'd try to give it up, then you'd get shamatha, single point of concentration, then you'd eventually understand about emptiness, you'd realize emptiness. And at some point in one life or other, you would you'd complete the path. You'd become a Hinayana Ahant. You'd become the enemy destroyer. You've destroyed the delusions utterly from the mind. And from that point, you finish the job, the wisdom wing. So when you die in that life, you don't come back. So now let's analyze the kind of person you'd be. When they talk about it all, it's always in terms of getting rid of the delusions, getting rid of the suffering, ceasing suffering, ceasing its causes. It sounds very kind of negating, you know, getting rid. But think of what would be left. What kind of person, think about this in ordinary terms, what kind of person would you be if you'd accomplished that cessation of suffering and its causes? If you were this Arhat, well, I tell you, you'd be the most astonishing, outrageous being in the universe. You would have not one atom of ego grasping left. You would have realized emptiness perfectly, perfected all the realizations. Therefore, of course, you'd have no attachment, no anger, no depression, no anxiety, no delusions of any kind whatsoever, because you've uprooted the fundamental cause, ego grasping. So you'd be free of all that rubbish. What would you be full of? Well, you'd be full of love, full of compassion, full of virtue, full of goodness, empathy, generosity, forgiveness, patience. You'd be an unbelievable person. You can't imagine how astonishing you'd be. You'd have bucket loads of love and compassion. You couldn't not have those because the delusions have now gone. So what's the difference between that compassion and the compassion here called the great compassion? This is the pointing out the difference. So, okay, you're on the Hinayana path. This is your goal. You're going to graduate at high school. You're going to achieve your own cessation of suffering and its causes. So life after life after life, that's your goal. Your goal is to get the hell out of samsara and not come back. And you need to have that renunciation. You need to want to give up samsara. That's the first and second scopes. You need that. But you've got that, and that's your goal. You're going to get out of samsara, and when you die in that life, you won't come back. So this is the point. Your goal is get out of samsara. So life after life, you're getting rid of the delusions. So naturally, your love is growing, your compassion is growing just naturally. And by the time in that particular life, you've finally perfected the path, you've become an arhat. And then when you die, because of your goal of getting out of samsara and the bliss that you would have accomplished, this is something we forget, but that's the natural consequence of getting rid of delusions. You'd be incredibly blissful. That bliss and that goal, I must get out of samsara, override your compassion, which you have bucket loads of, and you don't come back. Now, but if you're on the Mahayana path, or the Bodhisattva path, you go through the same stages exactly, no difference. Exactly the same practices, but your goal is you're going to become a Buddha. You're going to graduate at university. Or actually, you do postgraduate. If you're in Tibet, you do the Vajrayana as well. You're going to graduate. You're going to become a Buddha. So you're going to go through the same stages. You might even at some point even have realized emptiness and perfected that realization. Maybe at some point you don't even need to come back. But what happens for you when you die in that life? Your compassion, which is this great compassion. So compassion is, oh my God, look at that suffering. It's unbearable. But great compassion is, this is the unique one. What can I do to fix it? What can I do to make the suffering go away? As His Holiness would often refer to as universal compassion. This intense responsibility. It is my job. That's the Bodhisattva compassion. Great compassion is the difference. So what happens for you being on the Mahayana path, your goal is Buddhahood. When you die, and if you had achieved certain realizations, you might not need to come back, but your great compassion and body, your bliss, and you will come back and keep perfecting on the Bodhisattva path. So the key difference is this great compassion. It's not just some nice term. It's an actual technical different level, another whole level of compassion. It's my responsibility. And as Lama Zopa talks about it, if I don't do it, who will? In those four immeasurable thoughts. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May they be free. I will make this happen. That's the unique one. That's the one. That's the key. And Tonglen, the 8th and 9th points here, these culminate in that great compassion, which then shifts the mind into bodhicitta. And that's the 11th. So all these are just psychological steps, you know. Like I said, people spend years in retreat just doing these. So let's look at Tonglen then, back to Tonglen. So, okay, compassion is, oh my God, look at that person with a headache. That's terrible. I'm so sorry. Great compassion is what to take it away. Well, Tonglen is like icing on the top. You know what? Give it to me. I can handle it. I'd rather you not have suffering, and I would rather have the suffering myself. That's Tonglen. That's the meaning of it. It's insane. It's ridiculous. It's outrageous. Mothers have it for their children. You hear parents say, if only I could have that suffering. I would rather have it, that suffering. I mean, even one of my friends in prison, Richie, one of my friends all these 25 years, I first met 25 years ago, this ex-Mexican, and he's not ex, he's a Mexican ex-gangster who's killed people on the streets, is in prison for life. And he wrote me one time, and he's because he had like symptoms of bad liver and things, not AIDS, but whatever they call it. I get confused, not the disease itself, but a lot of them have that, you know, especially they've been in this solitary confinement for so many years, you know, many get sick. And he said he was getting medicine. And he said he really thought, perhaps, he said, Rabina, perhaps I shouldn't take the medicine, and perhaps I should just get sick and die and be happy to be purifying, you know, the harm I've done to others. And then he also said in the same letter, I think, he said he is so sad when he sees my people, he meant Mexicans, the young guys coming in. I mean, often the laws are changing, I think now, this is back in the 90s, who, you know, would come in, as be tried and sentenced as juveniles, like 15 years old and so on. He said, my people coming into prison, he said, if only I could take upon myself their sentence and they could be released. That's outrageous thought. I mean, I've not had that thought for anybody. That's incredible. That's what mothers have. This is what we're trying to get here. I would rather have it than you. So then the taking part is you imagine breathing in off that person, their suffering, and breathing it in like yucky smoke, breathing it into yourself, and you breathe it down. And like this example, you can use many techniques, and like smashing your self-cherishing, you know, chipping away at it. Then when you breathe out this blissful light, and you breathe out all your good things, your good health, your wealth, your merit, whatever you like, you breathe it and you give all of that to this person. That's taking and giving. And so that brings eventually this paradigm shift in the mind, you know. I mean, it's outrageous. So this is the biggest, I think there are misconceptions about this practice. What you've got to realize is you're merely using that person in front of you who's sick as the basis of your meditation. This meditation, you are the beneficiary of it. This is your method for getting great compassion. This is not a healing technique, okay? The commonest thing people do is, if you think, oh, someone's got a headache, I'll do Tonglen for them. No, you're the beneficiary of Tonglen. This is not for them. There are lots of healing techniques. You can do medicine Buddha, you can have pujas done. This is not a healing technique. This is a very specific technique, a training for you to smash your self-cherishing so you can develop this courageous attitude of wanting to be of benefit to others. It is a practice for you. You've got to understand that. So it's not a healing technique. And the next one, of course, is it's not that you're trying to get a headache. That's like a joke. Of course you're trying to get a headache. That's silly. It's an attitude that if you could, you would take upon yourself that person's pain. That's the attitude. I mean, it's outrageous if you really think about it. And then if you could, you would give them your happiness, your wealth, your health, etc., etc. I mean, you really think about it, it's quite shocking, you know. It's a very courageous practice. And you are the beneficiary. This is the practice that makes this paradigm shift, you know, that eventually culminates in bodhicitta. So now I think I need you to ask some questions. Come on. Yeah, 12, 11, a whole hour I've been talking. Come on, ask questions about what I've discussed so far. If there are any, if not, I can keep going.
It's Juhi. Can you see me?
Yes, let me see. Where are you? Who is it talking?
Juhi.
I have to look for you. Just wave your hand so I can see movement. Oh, there you are. I see you, sweetheart. Good, good. Yes.
So maybe I missed that part. So we benefit from Tonglen because, I'm sorry, I missed that part. We benefit because.
No, this is what's so fascinating, because it seems so hard to hear it. If you are training to become a cyclist, then you're the beneficiary, aren't you?
Yes.
You become the cyclist, don't you?
Yes.
Well, what are you doing in this meditation? What are you trying to accomplish by doing this meditation?
I'm smashing my what was that word?
Self-cherishing.
Self-cherishing.
So you become
Right.
more
Got
developed.
it.
So you're the
Got it,
beneficiary.
got it.
You're not trying to heal anybody. You're just using an example of a person in front of you whom you use as a reference point, whose suffering you wish to take upon yourself, and whose happiness you wish to give. So it's you training. It's like you're training yourself. It's a training for you.
Understood. Yes.
It's an outrageous practice so that's why it's not a healing technique.
Yeah.
You can't, I mean, if you've got the power to heal people and you do prayers and you send light out and heal, that's very specific. Nothing wrong with that. That is not this. It's very specifically you stretching your muscles to the limit to smash your self-cherishing till eventually you have this incredible love and compassion for others and only the wish to be a benefit to them. Do you see my point?
Yes.
Thank you.
Perfect sense. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Yes. So who was
Yes.
looking to ask a question? No?
I have a question in the chat box.
Okay,
Someone
good, Cara. Go on, darling.
They're asking if the Buddhists have infinite power, then why don't they have the power to take on others' negative karma?
I understand. Everything is a dependent arising. This is the same question that people ask about God. They talk about, Christians say that God gives us free will. God has infinite power, they say. So if that's true, why doesn't God take away our suffering? That's exactly the same question. So this is like, so the only way to understand if a person who has accomplished Buddhahood has these three essential qualities: infinite love, infinite compassion, infinite wisdom, and infinite power. It's implicit in that it's a dependent arising. And this is hard for us to understand. Dependent arising means this. Okay, use a simple example. Let's say you are the best acupuncturist in the planet. Let's say you've got the skill, the power, the power and the compassion to heal anybody. Think about this. Think about this for a second. You've learned all the techniques. You have every technique. You are the perfect acupuncturist. You can't find a better acupuncturist. That is a possibility. We know that. Now, listen to this. If I meet you and you're, let's say, who are you? Let's say it's, Wolfgang, and he's the best acupuncturist on the planet, but I don't like Germans. Then your hands are tied. Wolfgang cannot do a single thing to help me. He has the power to heal me. He has the wisdom to know how to heal me. He has the power to do so. He has the compassion for me, but I don't like Germans. Well, then I'm sorry, his hands are tied. Buddha is exactly the same. It's a dependent arising. So I have to have a connection with Wolfgang. I have to know his power, his compassion, his wisdom, and I have to want him to heal me. Then it works. It's the same with the Buddha. That sounds limited to us, or therefore he hasn't got power. It's because our view of power is based upon its being a self-existent power. There can't be such a thing like that. It's a dependent arising. It's a dependent arising. That's the answer I can say. So that if it doesn't help, you can ask more questions.
They said thank you.
Okay, that's good.
Another question in the chat box. B, would you like to speak? Or I will ask it. The question is, did Jesus practice Tonglen when he was on the cross?
No, I understand. I think if we take all these attitudes and take away the religious labels, I think it's fairly evident. You can look at people who've got compassion. You can see the behavior. So if you take away all the Christian talk, you see a person who took on, who was blamed for something. He was criticized and blamed and sentenced to die, wasn't he? Think of it simply. So we assume he was innocent, but he took upon this, and the way they describe it, he had this infinite compassion and love for others. So he happily gave his life. So I think you can say that's Tonglen. Of course you can. There's no question. Of course you can say that. Pretty incredible. What else, people?
Mark?
Yes. Hello, Mark.
Hi, Venerable.
Yes, good
Venerable
afternoon.
Robina.
Yes.
question is, if all beings are equal and we want to look at self and others as equal, why then do we practice these techniques of cherishing others more than ourselves? That
No, it's a good
seems
question.
illogical.
I understand. It's a good question. It's a good question. It's a good question. Okay, the only way to answer that is that what Buddha has found on the Mahayana path, what Buddha has found, when you've given up all delusion, this is the only way to understand it. When you've given up all delusions, all ego grasping, the root delusion that assumes a separate I, then you've given up all attachment to get what that I wants, and you've given up all aversion and jealousy and depression and anxiety, all the neuroses. When you've given those up utterly, then there is no longer the thought of I, Mark. It doesn't even exist. So this one, they're all equal to me. You then go to the next step, and then this is leading you. This is a gradual step. Then you don't just stay there. You go to the next step. And then when you've given up the delusions and realized emptiness, then there literally is no thought of a separate I. Your thought of I by that point, and especially when you add bodhicitta to it, is that it's as if you are everybody else, and you have this powerful sense of responsibility to help them. That would just be the natural consequence of letting go of all the delusions. So that's the only way to say it. If you stay with delusions, and assuming there's a separate I, then that's reasonable enough. Then you should take care of yourself. I mean, there's no other, it's true. But once you go beyond that, then that's why bodhicitta, even before you realize emptiness, bodhicitta is very clearly this experience of such compassion for others that there's just no longer the thought of I. There's no longer the thought of I. That's the only way to say it. There's only the thought of other. And then when you realize emptiness, that's even more profound. It's like as if you are now oneness with every living being, as if all their experiences are yours. And because you rid yourself of suffering, you only want to rid them of suffering, as if they were you. It's the only way to say it, I think. Do you understand, Mark? Does it make sense?
Yes, it does. So looking at the disadvantages of self-cherishing and the advantages of cherishing others, those are steps on the way to.
Yeah, that's right, precisely. This is why it's gradual, incremental, little tiny baby steps that lead each one to the next. It's a very logical progression. That's exactly right, Mark. It's exactly right.
Thank you.
Hello, Terry. Yes, darling. How can I help? A bit louder, sweetheart. I can't hear you so well. Your voice is a bit distant.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now, darling. Yes.
Okay. Is it worthy of taking a risk in a case, let's say I want to send money to a Russian, like a Buddhist temple, but I feel extremely insecure currently if I should do that or not. Is it worth of taking the risk to pursue such kind of like manner during this time?
You know, I think you just got to use your own common sense. It's a difficult time right now, isn't it? And if that could cause you lots of problems, in the end, I think the benefit that might come might not be worth the problems. It just be what I think you got to use your wisdom in those cases.
Exactly. I cannot know. I cannot absolutely know what the result would be.
Well, then I
cannot
think
know.
you play safe and you give your money to someone else whom you know it could help, where you don't get it. Don't risk. I think it's a good point, darling. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Who else is there? Any more there, Tara?
Yeah, we have the center at Laksam.
Good. Go on. Who is there? Who has a question?
I think Andrea.
Good, Andrea. Talk to me, darling.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. I have a question. So when I'm doing Tonglen, so if I'm doing it correctly, theoretically, so okay, I'm taking the suffering.
Could you get a little bit closer to the mic? Perhaps a little bit closer to the device, the computer.
Okay, so.
Go on, that's better.
Okay, my question is if I am doing it correctly. Okay, when I'm taking the suffering of others, but theoretically, I'm not putting the suffering on myself because it would be a much burden and it would kind of.
I don't understand your point, darling. Can you say?
The question is, so I think for me it is not so difficult to do this Tonglen, but maybe I'm making a kind of error or failure. So because when I'm taking the suffering, I'm turning this suffering to a weapon to kind of destroy the wrong I.
That's right.
And that's why it is not so difficult, because I'm not really taking the suffering and putting on myself all
this. Okay. No, the attitude, the real attitude the experiential one would be, you see this person with a headache, and you're trying to cultivate the view that you have compassion, you see them suffering, and their suffering is unbearable. So the view is, I would rather have that suffering than them. So please give it to me. I will hold it. I can carry it. I'm brave enough. I'm strong enough. I can take upon that suffering. And of course, you don't take the suffering, you don't get a headache, but it's the willingness, the attitude, the willingness, the wish that if I could, I would rather have it. I will take that burden, give it to me. That's the attitude, and that's what smashes your self-cherishing. Of course it does. It's a very courageous attitude. Like, I always think about, you don't have to do this just in a meditation. You can be walking along the street. You see a homeless person. Now, our first instinct is, oh, thank God I'm not homeless. Thank God I've got a home. Now, if you want to do Tonglen, you imagine walking to that person. You imagine giving them your clothing. You imagine giving them the keys to your house. You imagine giving them the keys to your car, and they go away and you sit down in their place. That's a pretty intense series of thoughts to have. That's pretty courageous. That's Tonglen.
Okay, and then you do Tonglen always with one person?
No, darling, it's many. People spend years of retreat taking upon themselves the suffering of the hell beings, the spirits, the gods, the humans, the animals, the enemies, the friends, the strangers, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, darling, thank you. Hello, Wolfgang.
Hello, Venerable Rubina. What helped me very much that you explained me a year ago, to have the thought, how can I help?
Yeah.
And not only theoretically, I would like to take over the headache of my son.
Yes.
No, really practically, really, my son has headache, my neighbor has headache. What can I do? Practically, what can I do? How can I help? So I think this was really a game changer for me personally. When I see some suffering, I really think, what can I do?
Yes.
But for this, what can I do? I need a very strong self. I have to be strong to be able to help somebody else.
Exactly.
I have to be strong, healthy.
That's right.
Fit. So how does this fit together? On one side, now I'm very much confused. On one side, I have the strong aspiration to be powerful, healthy, fit, strong, so that I can benefit others.
That's right. So where's the contradiction?
So first, I have to be very egoistic. First, I have to be healthy and fit. First, I have to be egoistic so that I'm able to help others. If I have a headache and I cannot help anybody, how can I help others? So first I have to be egoistic. First I have to be healthy. First I have to be in mental and physical good shape. So
that's right, exactly.
So that I can help others.
Okay, you're exactly right, except when you put the word in egoistic, there's an assumption in your mind that being strong equals having ego. That's not the Buddhist view. A strong person is a person who's got no ego, a person who's given up self-cherishing, who's given up attachment, who's given up anger, who's given up the very sense of a mistaken sense of a neurotic I. That person is outrageously healthy, outrageously powerful, outrageously confident. That's the point in Buddhism, and that's the wisdom wing. In the wisdom wing, you're getting rid of the problems in your mind that cause you to be weak and sad and pathetic and low self-esteem. That's the irony. So when we say the word ego, it's confusing for us because that sounds like a strong, healthy person. The Buddha's view is a strong, healthy person has no delusions left, is infinitely powerful, infinitely compassionate, and infinitely capable. That's the point. The Buddha's view is that any suffering we have, any limitations, any weakness, anything is coming from ego grasping, which is the assumption of a separate concrete I, and then the attachment to get what I want, then the self-cherishing. All of that is what limits you from helping others. So by getting rid of your delusions, you become this infinitely powerful person. So Tonglen is another radical method for smashing the obstacles inside you that prevent you from helping others. That's the point.
I have to think about it. Thank you very much.
No, but the key point, Wolfgang, because you said, when you said the word egoistic, which is, I think, the way Germans would say selfishness.
Yep.
The wisdom wing, the Buddha's whole point right back at the beginning is that why, Wolfgang, you, I, suffer, what limits you is the presence in your mind of this primordial assumption of a concrete separate I. Now, the realization of emptiness is what smashes that. And then because you have that sense of a separate limited I, you then have attachment to get what I want. Then you have aversion and anger when you don't get what you want. Now, what we see in the world is sometimes very powerful people who have a very powerful ego. They've also happened to have a lot of power to do things. They're very capable, very intelligent. It's not their ego. It's not the sense of a separate I that makes them powerful. It's their goodness that makes them powerful. But the people who are evil, who are powerful, is because they have the wish to harm. But if you get rid of all sense of a separate I, you have a sense of an infinite sense of self that's connected to others. Therefore, you have no fear, no delusions, no limitations. You are limitless in your power. You are limitless in yourself, in your self-confidence. You are limitless in your ability to help others then. So it's the delusions in your mind that separate you from others that are the cause of all suffering and your own limitations.
Yes, but that's all the way down the road. This enlightenment, this smashing the illusion of self-existence, that's the end game.
No, it's assumed all the way. We're chipping away.
Very far away. Yeah.
No, it's not. We're chipping away from the very beginning. Like when you study, you want to learn Einstein's theories, you start with 1 + 1 = 2. And Einstein's theories are implicit in every tiny technique that you learn that leads you to Einstein's theories. It's not as if Einstein's theories are separate from 1 + 1 = 2. So the whole path, emptiness and bodhicitta, are implicit from the day one in the instructions.
I get you. So emptiness is a process. It's not a single event.
No, that's right.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, that's exactly right, Wolfgang.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Good. Amjad.
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for today. So I find that my practice of Tonglen and any type of compassion almost in my daily life can sometimes be polluted by this attachment to reputation, an attachment to be seen as a good person.
That's right, exactly.
And it's really subtle, and I'm starting to see it a little bit, but it's really deep and frustrating, and I'm not really sure how to deal with it or argue with it sometimes.
Don't push yourself. The fact that you see it, Amjad, is enough. I mean, it's attachment to how we're seen by others is the deepest, most primordial attachment of all. It's only really will go when you finally realized emptiness. So all you can do is see it and counteract it according to your capacity. And just by seeing it, you see the problem. It's like as you keep learning to play the piano, you get more and more refined in seeing the mistakes. You don't get depressed about it. So each step of the way, you keep seeing it and you keep working. It's a gradual process, Amjad. It's okay.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yes. Who else?
Juhi, you have a question?
Yes, Juhi.
No.
No, I did not have a question. Sorry. I was just.
Okay, no problem.
No problem.
So now what culminates from the giving and the taking technique is now this outrageous attitude that comes of great compassion. Now it's my job. It's my job. And this is, again, the point that Wolfgang's bringing. The more you smash attachment, the more you smash self-cherishing, the more you smash the separate sense of self, the more all of these practices increase your power, increase your empathy, increase your capacity. That's what they do. This is the point. So now you have this outrageous, great compassion. And then that's what leads to now, finally, the complete shift of the mind, where you've made this paradigm shift. And now we have bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is one, your job is only to help who is ever in front of you. Whatever sentient being is there, the mouse, the pedophile, the beloved, the child, the dog. It's spontaneous and automatic and beyond conceptual. Your job is to be of benefit. You happen to have the wisdom to know how. And the other one, the attitude of bodhicitta, is this long-term, fierce determination to never give up, no matter how many lifetimes it takes, to move along on this gradual path of perfecting your mind and becoming a Buddha. That's it. So I think now we're going to go into great detail next module, rub our noses in all the shit, this transforming problems, because this is the key technique for getting this bodhicitta. That's why it's a separate little module. It's very powerful. It's outrageous. It's shocking. And what I think we'll use as our basis, the 8 verses of this Langri Tangpa. And I think that's how we'll go next week, next module. So this is the essence of these simple little 11 texts. Like I said, people spend years in retreat doing these 11 little gradual incremental techniques,
There's one more question.
But Wolfgang's question is so important because it's so deeply instinctively ingrained in us, naturally, spontaneously in our own views, and therefore in our own understanding, that this idea, as Wolfgang said, to have this fierce sense of confidence that I can do it, we assume a fierce sense of an ego. That's just not, the words doesn't matter, the words. What we've got to get to see is when you find, the gradual removing from your mind, starting in the very beginning, the gradual lessening of attachment and the lessening of anger and the lessening of delusions and the lessening of self-centeredness and the lessening of self-cherishing, that brings the increasing of self-confidence, the increasing of compassion, the increasing of power and ability to help others. That's the point. That's what we've got to hear. So when we hear get rid of self-cherishing, and when we hear get rid of a self and I, we hear that as very extreme and fundamentalist in our culture. And we assume you're chucking out the baby with the bathwater and you become like a nothing, weak person. So we've really got to get clear the meaning of these words, because it's very, very, very different from how we think, In other words, what limits us, what holds us back, is the presence of ego grasping, attachment, anger. And the process, the process is the weakening of all of the weakening of those branch delusions, which then enable us eventually easily to smash the root delusion when we realize emptiness. We're priming our minds ready. That's the idea, So yes, what's the question, Tara?
Yes, they ask, why does it say in the text for transforming problems into happiness that when you experience problems, you're happy because you your Tonglen practice of wishing others suffering to ripen onto you instead has come true?
I'm sorry, I'm really lost.
Sorry, let me ask you to go to the last. It says, how can you
please read the words again?
Sure. Why does it say in the text for transforming problems into happiness that when you experience problems, you're happy because you think your Tonglen practice of wishing others suffering to ripen onto you instead has come true?
But it won't come true. You don't have the suffering. It's ridiculous.
Okay.
It doesn't, the last part of you, just a moment. The last part of the question, it doesn't come true. You don't have suffering. You get less suffering. That's the irony.
Okay.
The first part, why to be happy when you have problems, we're going to discuss that in the next module. But it doesn't come true. That's ridiculous. This is the whole point. Tonglen is not to sit there and hope you get a bloody headache. That is ridiculous. That is completely bizarre and like completely ridiculous idea. But people, I'm not saying you're ridiculous, whoever asked that kind question. You do not get a headache. It's the attitude, the courageous attitude that if I could, I would rather have that burden than you have that sickness. It's a courageous attitude that I would rather have the problem than you because I want you to be free of suffering. It's an outrageously courageous attitude. And the interesting point is, for Wolfgang's point, the only person who's brave enough, if you like, to take upon the suffering of themselves by giving a person their house and they're becoming homeless is a person who's got infinite confidence and has got no neurotic nonsense left. So we'll discuss it all next module. What else is there, Tara?
That would conclude it. They agreed. And thank you.
Right. So, darling people, it's, as usual early. I cut you off all the time, but I think we've had more than enough. I think we've gone through these 11 points so simply. I mean, you could sit and listen to these commentaries for 2 years, but we've got the essential. And they're gradual, incremental, step by step by step. In other words, is my point to Wolfgang, that the packaging of all the practices, like if you were studying, you wanted to become like Einstein, you know that the courses of study that these wise physicists have given you, everything is, E equals MC squared, use that as my analogy, is implicit from day one. Every step leads you incrementally, logically, and naturally to the final conclusion. It prepares your mind step by baby step by baby step by baby step. It's integrated, totally integrated. It mightn't seem evident initially, you know, but that's the point. So we delight this 90 minutes, nearly 90 minutes. We've been listening, thinking, analyzing, trying to make sense of these techniques that are pretty outrageous, trying to understand how all these techniques, you know, and this is the other point. This is the other point. There's the wisdom wing, which is the lessening of delusions. Then there's the compassion wing. And even though it's continuing to lessen delusion, it's the growing of the goodness. So every time you practice the compassion wing, that weakens ego grasping and helps you understand emptiness more. Every time you lessen your delusions, that increases your compassion for others and helps you grow bodhicitta. So the explicit teaching in this module is bodhicitta. When we learn about emptiness and dependent arising, the explicit teaching there is emptiness. But practicing bodhicitta helps you realize emptiness. And practicing realizing emptiness helps you get bodhicitta because they're utterly integrated. The two wings of the bird are integrated. Yes, Wolfgang.
Venerable Robina, could I please ask you about the next small baby step? Taking on a headache or realizing emptiness is too far away. But what is the next step of wishing to help the other and really helping? If I can help, I will help.
I understand.
I will do so. I will
okay,
do so.
So
if
good,
I can
good,
help,
good.
I
So
will
then,
help.
yeah,
What is
so
the next,
wanting
the
to
next
help,
step? And I will help.
wanting to help is called love.
Yeah.
What can I do to help someone be happy? Compassion is wanting a person not to suffer. So each one is, what can I do to help? So then your ability, so first the thought is, I want to help, but you have to have the wisdom to know how. So in this general approach, in the Buddhist approach, you get the wisdom to know how to help a person who is, say, struggling with their life. The wisdom you need to be able to see clearly how to help comes from the work that you do on your mind by giving up attachment, giving up anger, giving up self-centeredness, giving up depression. Whether, okay, it could be a person wants you to help them, you know, cook a dinner, cook a meal. If you don't have the wisdom to know how to cook yourself, you can't help them. So here we're talking in general, helping sentient beings be happy and helping sentient beings suffer less. You can have the conventional ways to do it, like giving them a pill. You can have the conventional ways to help them make a cake, but we're talking the deeper level of helping them mentally. So the only way you're qualified to help a person mentally is by you knowing that in yourself. So the wisdom that you get comes from lessening ego grasping, lessening attachment, lessening depression, lessening self-centeredness, chipping away step by step. The more you do that, the more happy you become, but the more capable you come. And then you're able to put your money where your mouth is and be able to help a person. It's a gradual, incremental stages of development. I don't know what else to say. Is that useful?
Thank you very much.
Okay, darling. Thank you. In other words, the ordinary example again, Wolfgang. If I want to know how to learn math, and I don't know learning math, and you want to help me, that's called compassion. But your ability yourself to do math is the ability to help me. So even if you only know one piece, 1 + 1 is 2, you can help me only that much. So the more you have compassion, on its own is not enough. You've got to get wisdom. And the wisdom we're talking here is the wisdom to see someone's mind, to know exactly what help they need, to know exactly what piece of advice they need. This is much more powerful wisdom. It's the wisdom of knowing another person's mind based upon you knowing your mind. Are we communicating?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Wolfgang. And then, of course, practical help is how we help in the world. We don't just sit there being spacious in our mind. You learn how to cook. You learn how to be a carpenter. You learn how to play music. You learn how to do investments. They're the skills, but they're driven by the wisdom that understands, you know, interdependence and the compassion that wants to help people. It's not just wholly helping. It's all kinds of helping. Okay, people, thank you. We'll continue next week, rubbing our noses in our own shit next week. Oh, no, week after. You have a day, you have a week off to have a relax. Thank you. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Ma Kie Panam, Kie Gu Chig, Kie Panyampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pelba Shog. So they just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving, and keep moving. That's all I can say. It's incremental, one baby step at a time. Thank you so much. Thank you, Lars. Thank you, the center. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.